Today, we're tackling something that can be, well, incredibly frustrating in the clinic. That rash that just keeps coming back, and not just anywhere, but always in the exact same spot. We are talking about fixed drug eruptions, FDE.
Because FDE is, it's just consistently underdiagnosed.
So let's define it right out of the gate. If there's one single thing you take away from this, it has to be the hallmark of FDE.
It's all in the name.
To fix.
The absolute defining feature is the recurrence of a lesion at the exact same anatomical site when the person is re-exposed to that specific drug.
So they take the pill.
And the rash pops up on that same centimeter of skin every single time.
That site specificity is just wild. And look, this isn't some rare thing we're talking about.
Not at all. Clinically, we think of it as benign. And it usually is, but it accounts for a pretty significant slice of the pie.
How significant?
Somewhere between 9 and 22% of all cutaneous drug reactions. That is a huge number for something we so often miss.
And we miss it because...
Because the diagnosis hinges almost entirely on the history, on asking the right questions. If you don't specifically ask, hey, has this ever shown up in this exact spot before? You're just going to call it something else.
Exactly.
Okay,
let's talk epidemiology. Who gets FDE? Is there a typical patient?
Honestly, it can affect anyone. We see cases in infants, we see them in the elderly, all across the board.
But there's a peak.
There is. Clinically, the mean age of presentation tends to be in the 20s and 30s. And importantly, there's no gender preference here. It's an equal opportunity eruption.
All right, now for the list that really matters in clinic. The hit list. Which medications should be setting off alarm bells for us?
Well, there are over 100 implicated, but a few classes just dominate the list.
And at the top are?
Antibiotics, absolutely number one. Think sulfonamides like trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole.
Bactrim.
Yep. Also, the tetracyclines, doxycycline is a big one. Penicillins like ampicillin, quinolones, metronidazole. The list is long.
So a huge chunk of our go-to drugs for infections, but it's not just prescriptions, right? What about the stuff people just grab themselves?
That's a critical point. You have to think about the over-the-counter NSAIDs. They are major, major culprits.
Like ibuprofen, naproxen.
Ibuprofen, naproxen, aspirin, even the COX-2 inhibitors, and the one that everyone forgets to ask about, just plain old acetaminophen, paracetamol. You have to ask about everything they take for pain.
Any other classes that might, fly under the radar when you're taking a quick history?
Definitely. Ask about anticonvulsants. Carbamazepine and lamotrigine are known triggers, antimalarials like quinine. And very recently in the literature, there have even been reports linking FDE to the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine.
Wow. So the takeaway for us is?
If the patient swallows it, absorbs it, or injects it, it could be the trigger. Keep a wide net.
Which brings us to the really fascinating part, the pathophysiology. We know what happens, but let's get into the why. How on earth does the body remember the exact coordinates on the skin?
It's really a beautiful example of localized immunity. The whole mechanism is a very specialized cell-mediated immune response.
Okay.
And it's driven entirely by resident T cells, to be specific, CD8 plus intraepidermal T cells.
So let's break that down. We're talking about immune cells that they literally live in the skin. They've set up permanent residence there.
Yeah, precisely. They are skin-resident memory T cells. They've picked their spot. So when the drug is ingested, the drug, or maybe a metabolite of it, acts as what we call a hapten.
Chemical trigger.
Exactly. It binds to the basal keratinocytes, the skin cells, but only at those very specific fixed sites.
And that's when the local reaction kicks off.
That's when the alarm bells start ringing, but only in that one location. Those resident T cells activate almost instantly.
And what do?
They release a flood of powerful signaling proteins, cytokines like TNF-alpha and IFN-gamma. That cytokine surge is the fire that causes the lesion you see on the skin.
This has to explain the latency period, right? The difference between the first reaction and the second. How does that memory make it so much faster?
That is the absolute key to the fixed nature. After that first exposure, when the inflammation goes away, those CD8 plus T cells don't just disappear. They turn into memory T cells.
And they just wait there.
They stay dormant right at the reaction site. Just waiting.
So they're like these highly sensitized tripwires that are just stuck in one location.
That's a perfect analogy. And it's why the first reaction might take days or even weeks to develop. But the next time,
it's immediate.
The reaction can happen in as little as 30 minutes. It's a rapid recall response. The body doesn't need to learn all over again.
And you mentioned a potential genetic link. Something about an HLA allele.
Right. There's some evidence for a link to the HLA-B22 allele. For now, the clinical implication is mostly academic.
But in the future?
In the future, as pharmacogenomics gets better, we might be able to screen for this. We could potentially identify at-risk patients before ever giving them a high-risk drug.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift to what we actually see in the clinic. Clinical manifestations.
Yeah.
What's the classic presentation we need to have burned into our minds?
The classic lesion is one or more plaques that are very well demarcated, usually circular or oval.
And look for that color.
Look for the color. It starts erythematous, so red, but it quickly shifts to this dusky red or even violaceous hue, a purplish color.
And sometimes they can blister.
In more severe cases, yes, you can get a central blister or even a bulla.
But the lesions go away. So what's the most important clue for us to find between flares?
It's the footprint it leaves behind. When the acute inflammation resolves, it leaves a persistent slate gray or dusky brand mark. That's post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation.
And that can be the only sign.
It can be the only sign that anything ever happened. If you see that kind of discoloration, you have to ask the fixed drug question.
What about symptoms? Does the patient feel sick?
Generally, no. And that's a huge diagnostic clue. Systemic symptoms, fever, malaise, they're almost always absent.
They might feel it locally, though.
They might report some localized itching, a burning feeling, maybe some pain, but it's confined to the lesion itself.
So where do we need to be looking on the physical exam?
Well, limbs, trunk, hands, and feet are common, but you have to prioritize the mucosal surfaces.
This is such a critical point.
You have to check the genitalia, especially the glans penis, the perianal area, the lips, inside the mouth, the tongue. Mucosal involvement is incredibly common.
And it can happen on its own.
It can happen entirely on its own, without any other skin plaques at all.
And there are even some drug site preferences, right? Like little clues.
There are. For example, cotrimoxazole has a strong tendency to cause lesions on the genital mucosa. Naproxen, on the other hand, often pops up on the lips. Knowing that can really help focus your questions.
Okay, what about the variants? The tricky ones that can lead to a misdiagnosis?
Right. You have to be aware of things like bullous FDE, where it's mostly just large blisters, or generalized FDE, which can be confusing because lesions appear in new spots, which seems to break the fixed rule.
And non-pigmenting FDE.
Exactly, which never leaves that classic brown mark, making the history even harder.
Then there are the high-stakes mimics, the ones that look like severe life-threatening conditions.
Absolutely. You can have forms that mimic toxic epidermal necrolysis. We call it 10-like FDE or erythema multiform-like FDE. Being aware of these is vital because you don't want to mistake a bullous FDE for 10 and start an unnecessary aggressive intervention.
So that brings us to the diagnostic framework. With all this variability, how do we lock in the diagnosis? Is it lab work or detective work?
It is overwhelmingly detective work. The diagnosis is primarily clinical. All the other tests are secondary, really just for atypical cases.
Well, so what's the one gold standard question we have to ask?
You have to ask, have you ever had a similar lesion, a similar rash in this exact location before?
And a yes to that is?
A confident yes is basically pathognomonic. It's the ball game.
And since people don't think of their daily Tylenol or Advil as drugs, how specific do we need to get?
Incredibly specific. You have to ask about every single thing. Over-the-counter painkillers, vitamins, supplements, recent vaccines. Patients won't make the link unless you prompt them.
But what if the history is just murky? What tests can we use for support?
A punch biopsy can give you great supportive evidence. The histopathology will show things like interface dermatitis and pigment incontinence.
And if we need to pinpoint the actual drug?
Patch testing is getting more popular and it's quite safe. You apply the suspected drug to the healed lesion site. But the true gold standard is still an oral drug provocation.
Which sounds risky.
It is. It carries a real risk of causing a severe flare, and it must only ever be done by an experienced specialist in a controlled setting.
Okay, let's quickly hit the differential diagnosis list. What are the common things FDE gets mistaken for?
The most common are probably insect bites or just urticaria, hives. The key difference, FDE is always fixed to the exact same site.
What else?
Erythema multiform is another one. But again, FDE has that much stronger, tighter link to one specific drug and that fixed location.
And the really critical distinction, the one from SJS10.
So bullous or generalized FDE can look terrifyingly like SJS or 10, but SJS10 involves much more extensive skin detachment, widespread mucosal damage, and crucially systemic symptoms. Your SJS10 patient is sick, your FDE patient is usually well.
Let's put this into practice. Case example 1, a classic urgent care scenario.
Absolutely. So a 33-year-old woman comes in with these painful, violaceous patches on her arm and thigh. She thinks they're spider bites.
Right.
But the key clue came out when we asked the question. She hesitates, then recalls an identical rash in the exact same spots about 5 months earlier.
She just thought she was unlucky with bugs, so how'd you find the cause?
We went through the checklist, and it turns out she takes ibuprofen intermittently for menstrual cramps. The timing lined up perfectly. We told her to stop it for good, and the lesions resolved. The whole diagnosis was just getting past her belief that they were bites.
That is the power of that one question. Okay, case 2, which shows that this can lead to a lot of unnecessary care.
This was a 25-year-old man with a recurrent bright red patch on his finger. For over a year, it was repeatedly misdiagnosed and treated as cellulitis.
So he got course after course of antibiotics.
He did. And the rash would get better, which made everyone think the antibiotics were working.
But they weren't the cure.
Not at all. The resolution was just a coincidence. See, the patient was taking intermittent doxycycline for his acne.
So when he was diagnosed with cellulitis and put on a new antibiotic, he would, of course, stop his doxycycline. It was the withdrawal of the doxycycline that cleared the rash, not the new antibiotic he was starting.
That is a brilliant clinical pearl. So once we have the diagnosis, what's the definitive management?
This is the best part. It's so satisfyingly straightforward. Prompt identification and definitive total withdrawal of the offending drug. That's it.
And for acute symptom relief while the lesions are still there?
You just treat the local inflammation. A medium-potency topical corticosteroid works great. Oral antihistamines can help with the itching.
A little caution there.
A little caution. Very rare FDE cases have actually been linked to antihistamines themselves, like cetirizine. So, as always, maintain a high index of suspicion.
So the most critical step for long-term prevention is?
Patient education. Full stop. This is where we make the biggest difference. You have to clearly tell them the name of the drug.
And what to avoid. Advise total avoidance of that agent and any chemically related drugs. And please document the adverse drug reaction clearly and prominently in their medical records. That document is their safety net.
FDE is a really distinct entity. It's defined by those local memory T cells and that precise site-specific recurrence.
It's misdiagnosed all the time, but the path to getting it right really hinges on that one simple, crucial question. Did this happen right here before?
And the prognosis is excellent once you find the trigger. Management is just decisive withdrawal and good patient education.
Exactly.
The knowledge from today will help you make that diagnosis. But let's look past the acute phase for a moment. The most common thing left behind is that post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, that brown mark. It fades, but it can cause real distress for patients.
It absolutely does. And to really optimize their outcome, to speed up the resolution of that persistent mark, there's one piece of practical advice we have to give them that goes beyond just stopping the drug. What is it?
Diligent sun protection.
That's it. Because UV exposure will just darken that residual mark and make it stick around longer. You have to stress broad-spectrum sunscreen, protective clothing. It makes a huge difference in the final cosmetic outcome. It's what really completes the management cycle for the patient.